on a fine Sydney morning as another outdoor adventure is about to start from Central Station. For many off-road adventurers who seek the ultimate thrills and spills in the wild, nothing is as terrifying as Sydney traffic. Bob and Stan are no exception. On this trip, they have joined forces with Brad Hancock of Bush Trek Tours and motoring journalist Alan Whiting, who wants to thoroughly test the new Nissan Patrol for an expedition from Sydney to Birdsville via the little-travelled Great Stony Desert.
You're off on an adventure. Come share the Aussie spirit too. It's your land, your Australia.
On this trip, they'll bisect the paths of historical adventurers Burke and Wills, Charles Sturt and James Poole. Everything is packed properly. The tour party is secure in the vehicles, and it's goodbye to the bright lights and the traffic lights as we get set to leave Sydney on the Great Western Highway. The going is good, and the first stop is made at Little Hartley, 25 kilometres beyond Katoomba in the Blue Mountains, 130 k's from Sydney. The historic courthouse and church give a clue that we're leaving modern civilization behind for a couple of weeks. And little do our tour party realise the difference between the terrain we're about to encounter and the old English beauty of the spring blossoms. Relishing the open highway driving, the party makes good time to Wellington for lunch in the park. The town was built on the site of an old mission in 1846 and was once known as the slowest town in the Western District. It's still peaceful. The Wellington limestone caves nearby are a major attraction, but we decide to push on for the first overnight stop, Wilcannia, where Alan Whiting will join the expedition. It's been a long day, and the adventurers are nearly 1,000 kilometres into the journey, and another early start is on the cards. Day 2, and the end of the bitumen. Just out of Wilcannia, on the way to the opal mining town of White Cliffs, the bitumen stops, and the results of the heavy overnight rains can be seen and felt. The greasy roads certainly made for some interesting driving, and it's not just the tourists who get taken by surprise. This telecom maintenance team was discovered trying to get back onto the track. They were offered a tow, but had already radioed for a backup four-wheel drive to come out to the rescue. White Cliffs, the next destination, is 100 kilometres off the main road. Originally part of the giant Moomba station, it came into prominence when 4 station hands noticed brightly coloured stones in White Cliffs paddock in 1889. Normally, this part of northwestern New South Wales is near desert, but the rains have meant a lush growth of grass and scrub. Well, lush by desert standards. Many watercourses cross the trail to White Cliffs, providing some excitement for many of the crew aboard the troop carrier and in the luxury of Brad's Bush Trek Land Cruiser. Most of these people were new to the bush and off-road adventure. It's a mixed party: children, Miranda, who's confined to a wheelchair, Bob, a bank manager, and others we'll meet later. Road trains are a fairly familiar sight in this part of the world, providing a vital transport link with the bigger rural centres. This truck from Broken Hill wasn't worried by the mud and the rains. They, like the mail, have to get through, wet or dry. He stopped to give the party the right of way over the flooded watercourse, and then he was away on his journey. White Cliffs, permanent population around 50, and outnumbered by tourists most of the time. The facilities in the town are good. Pub, club. Hello, here's a familiar sight, last seen being towed out of the mud. By the way, all of these outback towns offer a complete range of fuels if you intend heading west. Some signs speak for themselves. Opal mining and selling is still a major industry in town, although on a relatively small scale. The Opal showroom proved to be a magnet for our party in search of a bargain. Whilst many of the residents live in underground dugouts and the state's first underground motel is in the process of being excavated, it's not the only style of dwelling. This house is made of bottles, a very practical material for the hot days and cold nights in the outback. Brad, Bob, Stan and Alan have decided that the rains will mean slow going out in the desert. So, as the famous Willie Nelson song goes, on the road again. A road getting progressively worse and ideally suited for four-wheel driving. The rain meant a sudden stop for this refrigerated truck. It just ground to a halt when the wheels lost all traction. The driver had to leave it at the middle of the road until conditions dried out enough. Luckily it was empty, so there was no loss of load. The hot western sun is drying the road out. Soon the truck will leave, and our party heads off on their way to Milparinga. They stop for lunch midway between White Cliffs and Tibooburra. While the adults boil the billy and make a pile of sandwiches, the kids investigate the remains of a kangaroo skeleton. Then, their first view of what will become quite a common sight out here. A stumpy tail or shingleback lizard. After lunch, the journey continues to the overnight stop at Milparinga. The roads are straight and seem to stretch to the other side of Australia. They go on and on forever. A red dirt, or more often after the rain, a red mud ribbon into the distance. The rains have turned dry watercourses into flooded torrents. Just how deep is the muddy water? One way to find out, and a challenge for the Nissan. One which it passes with flying colours. At last, Milparinga, which means water may be found here in Aboriginal. The town has a population of 4, a phone, fuel and pub, all the necessities of life. This area is steeped in history. Nearby are the ruins of the Mount Brown gold diggings, which in the 1880s supported a population of over 1,000. The abandoned buildings stand as monuments to a pioneer past. The younger members of the party quickly discover that Boers and Bindis are as numerous as the camels. After a cold night, it's time to pack up, a process which seems to take longer and longer. Perhaps it's a result of the wind which is always blowing out west. One of the local camels say farewell, and the next part of the adventure gets underway to Depot Glen. The children point out an old man emu with his 2 chicks. Some of the countless red and grey kangaroos. Charles Sturt camped here for 6 months in the hottest time of the year, knowing that there was no water to be found in the area he wanted to explore. His second in command, James Poole, died and was buried nearby. Mount Poole is named after him. This had been Sturt's camp for those long, hot 6 months in 1845, after he and 15 other explorers had come from Adelaide on an expedition through the uncharted Central Desert. It's a trip that Bob and Stan are emulating, as Sturt's Stony Desert is still uncharted, and they'll have to rely on compass navigation on their way to Birdsville. The road beyond here to Tibooburra is little more than a track, in sharp contrast to the quite outstanding roads they'd travelled on so far, considering the number of vehicles normally using them. In fact, The roads here are more suited to the hundreds of brumbies or wild horses which galloped off when they saw the cars. Tibooburra has the distinction of being the most isolated town in New South Wales. It often tops the list in the temperature readings. The hotel was built in 1888. In fact, there are two pubs in Tibooburra, both built in 1888 and classified by the National Trust. The local museum is well worth a visit and is a triumph of the taxidermist's art, with wildlife permanently mounted in lifelike poses, plus a fascinating collection of local artefacts. Tibooburra is the base for Corner Country, a local name for the point where three states meet. This will be the next stopping point for the adventurers, but they take some time out for some fun driving on the hard surface of a clay pan, smooth after the rains. Near Tibooburra is the tri-state border, Cameron's Corner, where New South Wales, South Australia and Queensland all join. Our party take the opportunity to sign the visitor's book before settling down to lunch. Miranda, in the yellow hat, can't move without the aid of her wheelchair, but she had a ball on the crossing, proving that anyone can get out and enjoy our magnificent outback if proper preparations are made. One of the things which really impressed Bob and Stan was the quality of the roads. In most cases, they were straight and wide, with a good surface. The kind of roads you'd expect to be maintained near a prosperous rural centre, not out here where the traffic is few and far between. This one reminded the kids of a roller coaster. And that's just the effect it had on the entire party. Although the most hardy travellers ended up feeling a little seasick. Now we're heading for the Strzelecki track, the route traversed by Polish explorer Baron Paul Strzelecki and the town of Inaminka. The wide roads make easy going when they're dry, but when they're wet, it's another story. Now here's a strange sight. It's an outstation for musterers, with the remains of a converted double-decker bus far from the streets of Sydney, providing accommodation for stockmen during the annual muster. Bob's the bloke with the beard. He drove the troop carrier on this trip, and his passengers had a whole lot of fun. One thing about these roads, they seem easy, but absolute concentration is vital, as a road train can appear out of nowhere, or you can quickly come across cattle standing in the middle of the road. We haven't quite reached the Black Stump yet. The sign points towards Mumba, where there's an oil field. This sign, by the way, marks the beginning of the Strzelecki track. Here's one which didn't make it, a dingo. The colouring isn't unusual, although city folk are more used to the sandy colour. Out here, the wild dogs come in a variety of colours and markings. In 1859, a Victorian farmer, Thomas Austin, imported a small shipment of rabbits from England to his farm in Geelong. Within 25 years, they had multiplied into millions and reached plague proportions. Myxomatosis controlled the scourge for some time. However, now rabbits appear to be on the winning side. Just watch this hillside come alive. They have resulted in the native bandicoots becoming extinct in New South Wales, besides causing incredible permanent damage to the countryside, creating desert where there was once grass. However, there are predators which welcome the increase of the rabbit population, including these hungry eagles. Inaminka, in the heart of Burke and Wills country. It's a picturesque town. Its hospital, built by the early flying doctors, now a ruin. The adventurers mark the site as a good place to make camp and return back to the heart of the town. The pub is the last watering hole before the Great Stony Desert and bears the stamp of the modern Burke and Wills, the movie which was filmed in part here. The Inaminka trading post is like a mini Kmart, having just about everything. It's time to make camp and get some shut-eye as a glorious sun sets, framed by the hospital window. Breakfast time for the whole population. A pet dingo tucks into a rabbit. And keeping a discreet distance, waiting for scraps, are the crows. Brad and Kim Hancock share the cooking on this chilly but fine morning. And a couple of corellas have a grandstand seat on the ruined chimney, watching the preparations for breakfast. But, in turn, high above them, flies an eagle, perhaps thinking about his own breakfast. Maybe a plump white corella. The Inaminka airfield marks the last sign of civilization the party will see before Birdsville on the other side of the desert. On their return journey from the Gulf in 1861, Burke and Wills made camp at nearby Cooper Creek, and there they both died as a result of malnutrition and exhaustion. Although the bodies were later recovered and taken to Melbourne for reburial, this area is known as the site of Burke's grave. It's not good wheelchair access, so Miranda gets carried into the historic site, watched by the cheeky inhabitants of the area, short-billed corellas. The water in Cooper Creek is muddy, but the locals drink it and swear by the flavour. Our crossing is uneventful, although Alan has to have 2 goes at the exit bank. The other cars find it easy going. Both Bob and Stan are relieved that this crossing is very different in one respect from those on their previous adventures to Cape York. The party pays tribute to the courage of Burke and Wills at another historic site, the Dig Tree, marked by the explorers with directions on where to dig for life-giving provisions. Bob jokingly wanted to buy the middle part of this tree and take it home with him, but no one would take him up on the offer, and for good reason. Travelling photographers John Dick and his wife carved the face of Robert O'Hara Burke in this tree in 1898. The bark has grown around and framed the carving, a remarkable quirk of nature. From this point, we start to encounter the desert. And some of the vehicles which never made it. The rains have brought the beautiful desert flowers into bloom, transforming an otherwise barren landscape. On the hills are cairns, erected by the desert Aborigines over the ages as guides to water. And water becomes the adventurer's first problem, as the old radiator in the troop carrier fails and causes overheating. Could this be the first Nissan-powered Toyota? They make camp to repair the vehicles. First the tyres. Then the radiator is taken out of the troop carrier for attention. It's cleaned down with Coca-Cola, a great rust remover. Then a solder job. Yes, you're right. It is the handle from a socket set, heated up in the fire. Once it's soldered, a good rub with coke and steel wool, then back into the Toyota. It's been a hard 2 hours work, so a well-earned break for lunch. More repairs, and off to Birdsville. At the next smoko stop, Brad shows his tour party where they are and where they'll be going.
And we've just come across Providence Creek. Up to this junction here, you can see that that one joins on back to the main run through that we'd be normally taking to Birdsville. However, what we're going to do here is turn left and run directly across Sturt Stony Desert. We'll take through a lot of the lake country and come out, hopefully, at Wirupiri Tank, which then gives us a clear run through back onto the Birdsville track into Birdsville. This distance is 100 k's. I expect that it will take us 2 days. And we've got a lot of lake country, we've got a lot of sand dunes, and you know, to say it will take 2 days or it might take us a week, who knows? All right, but we are planning on only one night stop. This is the actual turn off here. We'll follow this track for about 2 or 3
This large king brown snake decided to head for the peace and quiet of the bush. Heaven knows how long this relic of the 1920s has been out here. But there's no rust on the Model T Ford. It's hard country, vast and flat. party stops to look at a young eagle in a nest before getting onto the desert. Bob was intrigued to discover how the zebra finches shared the nest for their protection. The good roads and tracks are just yesterday's memory. Here, you choose your own road. The cars were overheating, and so too were the people in the desert sun. There were only 2 trees in sight, so the party decided to take advantage of the tiny bit of shade available, although it made for a tight squeeze under the trees, and enjoyed a lunch break. Brad's car has a radio phone, a vital piece of equipment when venturing far off the beaten track. It means that in any emergency, the party can call for help from anywhere in the country. Another necessary piece of equipment for this type of driving. Where there are no roads or signposts, a compass bearing is the next best thing. The Great Stony Desert is covered in sand, scrub, rocks and bogs.
We're 5 minutes into the desert and we've lost 2 cars already.
This was to set the scene for the next few days.
Make that 3 cars.
All 3 vehicles got bogged. Out in the desert, nothing is straightforward. The Nissan had to be winched sideways. A good test for the worn winch supplied by ARB.
Okay, from... No, because that'll pull it around that way. What I want to do is pull it back over this way, which will pull the front bar.
The troop carrier also had to be winched sideways. It wasn't pleasant. The mud stank and the mosquitoes seemed the size of crows.
Stay near the hook.
What we're going to try and do is winch the Nissan in between the 2 Toyotas and up to another tree which is about 200 metres away. Two.
Hang on, mate.
Luckily, there was a tree near the edge of the bog.
The tree we're winching onto, it's got a young eagle in it.
Bob and Stan always make sure they have chafe straps on hand to protect any tree they have to use as an anchor. Chains can ring bark a tree before you know it, leaving it to die. The Nissan is the first to be pulled out. It performed well for the entire trip, and the only thing that Alan could fault was the set of standard road wheels. One down, 2 to go. Both Bob and Stan recommend that you have a minimum of 3 cars if you're planning a desert crossing. And make sure they all have winches. You'll need at least 300 to 400 feet of cable, plus some come-alongs. You're going to need plenty of fresh water. It's hot, thirsty work, and even the passengers who are confined to the vehicles get thirsty. Bob's party had to ration water. It was a bit hard for the kids, but they all understood. On the first day in the desert, the party didn't make much distance. The fire is great to keep off the chill of the desert, but it didn't worry the incessant mosquitoes.
We came over this crest down here and I thought, oh, there must be a surf on the other.
Day 2 in the desert. Let's see how far we get. Just 100 yards from the overnight camp, and bogged again.
Bob, you won't want to drive yours straight up, it'll come straight through.
The Nissan took a different route and made it to the top of the hill. It'll be the anchor for the winching process.
Driving off that now?
The desert normally resembles a moonscape, with rocks, rubble and craters, but the rains have brought dormant seeds to bloom, softening the landscape. Brad's Bush Trek Land Cruiser and trailer tip the scales at just over 4 tonnes and gets bogged at the drop of a hat. Jack, with the camera, is a journalist for Australasian Post, and Bob in the check shirt is a bank manager, having a taste of the great outdoors. It's another very hot day, and it's back to the winching.
Find the tags on this cable, mate. Quite a few.
This is a double winch. Two vehicles hooked up, and both pulling as hard as they can. A never-ending story of frustration. Another 300 yards and, you've guessed it, bogged again. The dirt is like talcum powder. And if this isn't enough, the troop carrier is boiling badly. Time to add more precious water. Bob isn't just battling the elements. He has to keep warmly dressed in spite of the heat of the midday sun in the desert. He suffers from asthma and had such a severe attack that the rest of the party nearly called in the Royal Flying Doctor Service from Broken Hill. This time, the angle of the trucks when they bogged caused concern, besides making them damned hard to winch out. A problem easily solved when all the passengers sat over to one side. Although all of the trucks had special diffs fitted before the trip, even that couldn't guarantee traction. This was the only time on the whole desert crossing that the team had to shovel mud away from the wheels. Just look at that mud. No wonder it took 3 days to travel 80 kilometres across desert wastes. The desert emus were totally unafraid of the adventurers. Then again, they probably hadn't come across four-wheel drives before, so some of the party stopped for a closer look at the desert locals. Then came a call on the radio. The Nissan and the troop carrier seemed to be able to traverse most of the boggy areas, but Brad's heavily laden Land Cruiser got stuck regularly.
I'll go back a bit, I think. Myself some room.
And he said he's found the path, he thinks, out of here.
Right.
He hasn't yet, but he gets...
So everyone's a bit keen to get to Birdsville tonight?
No. We'll have to go up anyway.
What needs to go up?
I think the pan.
I mean a little bit.
A little tiny bit.
Some of the desert burrs are more than 2 inches long and tougher than steel. Alan gets one in the tyre of the Nissan. Bob and his son Michael lend a hand. Oops, now Bob has a flat.
Great spot to jack up. Ground very hard. It's quite warm.
The figures on the skyline look good, don't they?
Then, after tea, Brad notices his tyre. In the cool light of the morning, the desert flowers take on a special radiance. It's almost worth the endless bogs to be here at the right time to see the natural beauty of the hardy little flowers, created as survivors.
Leaks here somewhere.
Brad's trucks run on tubeless tyres, and he demonstrates a simple repair method.
Just put a plug in it, should be okay.
Simply enlarge the hole, insert a plug, and inflate. This time, we travel as much as 150 yards before the inevitable. Now Brad is stuck and Bob is boiling. But the general feeling is, so what's new? The Nissan Patrol did the hard work and pulled out the stuck vehicle, while everyone joined in to push. Some of the burrs can penetrate through the soles of boots, so they all had a good look before they put their feet down to push.
You're on.
In spite of the previous repair job on the radiator, it's leaking badly and boiling. So Bob uses one of the many old bushman's tricks he's picked up on his travels to the back of beyond. Take an egg, any sort and any age. Separate the yolk from the white. Chuck away the yolk and drop the white into the boiling radiator. It poaches nicely and seals any leaks for a time. It should be enough to get you out of trouble anyway.
All right.
it's coming out there right now, so I'd be fine.
Cooking, well, motor repairing, is hard work, so it's time for a beer while they survey the instant repair job. Now the going over the big dried up swamps is good, and the bogs are rapidly left far behind as the party leaves the desert on the way to Birdsville. Brad's car boils, so both Toyotas get a much needed refill. It pays to almost overload on water when you travel out here. You never know when you'll need it and for what. At Wirripiri Bore, all of the water containers are filled up again. Perhaps it's because they haven't seen water for a long time, but the murky water really tastes terrific. This bore is always full, and the endless desert winds turn the windmill pump continually, bringing the life-giving water to the surface.
Well, we've finally made it off the old Birdsville track, and we're onto the new one. And we've also crossed the desert.
It feels like the Great Western Highway after those days of crawling through untracked desert, over and through bog after bog, even though the bad conditions only lasted for 80 k's. The next stop should be Birdsville, and the end of the first stage of this desert adventure is in sight as the cars leave the old Birdsville track and join the new. At last, civilization and a good beer, a good meal and a good shower, in whatever order they come. Birdsville, home of the famous annual races which draws punters and socialites from all around Australia, is quiet at the moment. So there's no difficulty in finding a big enough table for the celebration dinner. It's time to look back and laugh at the incredible frustration of the last 3 days of bogs. To remember that they had crossed a part of Australia which had probably never been crossed by vehicles before. And to plan ahead for stage 2 to Ayers Rock, Kakadu, billabongs haunted by man-eating crocs and more. And each one knowing that after this meal is the promise of a real bed with real sheets and screens to shut out the very real mosquitoes.
We'll take you through the country. If you survive, we'll bring you back. No air-conditioned buses here. It's four-wheel off the track. You can swim at a crocodile. You can paddle your own canoe. Come see Australia's wild side with off-road adventures like you. Off-road adventure. Off-road adventure. From desert stones to marshy bogs to harsh sun-beaten sand, there's adventure all the way with Bernie